The collapse wasn't graceful. It was a sudden, terrifying surrender of gravity, the way a building falls when the foundation finally gives way. 1 second, Sophia was standing amidst the crystal and the lies. The next, her weight was dead against my chest, her emerald silk sliding against the rough wool of my tuxedo. The ballroom went silent, that heavy, suffocating silence that only happens when the untouchable are touched by mortality. I didn't care about the eyes of the city's elite boring into us. I didn't care about the rumors that would ignite by morning. I only cared about the frantic, bird-like flutter of her pulse under my hand. I pulled her closer, shielding her from their hunger, and whispered the truth that would likely cost me everything I had built. I will not lose you. Not tonight. Not to anyone else. 30 minutes earlier, the air had been different. The Blackwood Charity Gala is an annual ritual where the city's sharks put on tuxedos and pretend they don't taste blood in the water. It's a room built of old money and new corruption, smelling of expensive perfume and moral decay. I stood near the periphery, a glass of champagne untouched in my hand, watching the dance. Not the one on the floor, but the one happening in the shadows. Sophia was there, of course. She was listed on the guest register as a socialite, a distant cousin of an oil magnate, a harmless, pretty face to fill a seat at table 4. But I knew better. I knew the sharp, predatory intelligence behind those amber eyes belonged to an investigative journalist who had spent the last 8 months hunting her biggest story, me. She moved through the crowd with a practiced ease, laughing at the right jokes, tilting her head at the right gossip, but her focus was razor sharp. She wasn't looking at the auction items. She was tracking the mayor, watching the envelope slide from his jacket to the pocket of a construction tycoon. It was a dangerous game she was playing. She thought she was the hunter, invisible in the tall grass. She didn't realize that I had been watching her watch me for months. I knew the way she took her coffee, black, 3 sugars, drank standing up while reading case files. I knew she kept a pistol in her nightstand that she didn't know how to use. And I knew that tonight, she was pushing her luck too far. The atmosphere between us was a physical thing, a taut wire stretched across the ballroom. Every time our paths crossed, the air thickened, heavy and charged with the static of everything we couldn't say. She would glance at me, her expression a perfect mask of polite disinterest. But I saw the flush on her neck, the slight dilation of her pupils. She was terrified of me, and she was drawn to me. The feeling was mutual. I should have had her removed months ago. My security chief had suggested it, a quiet accident, a career-ending scandal. But I couldn't do it. I admired her reckless bravery. In a room full of people who bowed to power, she was the only one trying to break it. I watched her circle the room, closing in on a conversation she shouldn't hear. She was wearing a dress that clung to her like a second skin, a deep green that brought out the fire in her hair. It was a distraction, a weapon, and it was working on everyone but me. I saw the tension in her shoulders, the way her hand gripped her clutch too tightly. She was close to something, evidence, a confession, a smoking gun. She thought this was her moment of triumph. But the game had shifted without her knowing. The predators in this room weren't just corrupt politicians. They were killers who smiled with capped teeth. I had seen the way the Moretti underboss, a man who solved problems with car bombs and silence, looked at her earlier. He knew. And if he knew, her life was measured in minutes. I started to move, cutting a path through the crowd. My intention was to intercept her, to whisper a threat that would send her running out the door and back to safety. I was ready to play the villain one last time if it meant she kept breathing. I saw her pause near a pillar, her hand coming up to her forehead. At first, I thought it was frustration. She swayed slightly, correcting her balance with a stumble that looked almost like a dance step. Then she looked up, and our eyes locked across the sea of black ties and diamonds. The defiance was gone. The sharp intelligence was clouding over, replaced by a confusion that chilled my blood. Her skin, usually flushed with the adrenaline of the chase, went the color of ash. She wasn't just tired. She wasn't just overwhelmed. The glass in her hand tilted, champagne spilling unnoticed onto the floor. She took one step toward me, an instinctive plea for help she would never voice, and then the strings were cut. The confident facade cracked, shattering completely as her knees gave way. I didn't think. I didn't calculate the optics. I just moved, the distance between us closing in a heartbeat as gravity came to claim her. It wasn't a graceful descent. In the movies, the heroine swoons, a gentle wilting of a flower onto a convenient chaise lounge. Reality was far more brutal. Sophia didn't swoon. She collapsed, her body simply resigning from the fight against gravity. I caught her a fraction of a second before her head would have struck the unforgiving marble floor, the impact jarring my shoulders and sending a shockwave of adrenaline through my veins that nearly made my own knees buckle. The sensation was immediate and overwhelming. She was dead weight in my arms, a terrifyingly limp bundle of silk and soft skin that contrasted violently with the rigid, armored persona I wore like a second skin. Her champagne flute shattered on the floor, the sound distinct and sharp, cutting through the ambient hum of the string quartet like a gunshot. For a heartbeat, that was the only sound in the world, the crystal disintegrating and the ragged, shallow gasp that escaped her lips as she landed against my chest. Then the room rushed back in. The polite murmur of the gala evaporated, replaced by a sudden, jagged silence that felt heavy enough to choke on. I could feel the eyes of the city's elite snapping toward us, 100 predatory gazes locking onto the spectacle. To them, this wasn't a tragedy. It was entertainment. It was blood in the water. I saw the mayor's wife cover her mouth with a diamond-encrusted hand, her eyes wide with feigned concern that didn't mask the gleam of scandal hunger. I saw the Moretti lieutenant near the bar, his smirk faltering for just a second before he raised his glass in a mock salute, his eyes cold and knowing. He knew exactly why she had fallen. My security detail materialized out of the shadows, a wall of black suits moving to intercept the curious onlookers who were already stepping closer, phones half raised to capture the downfall of the evening. Elias, my head of security, reached out to take her from me, his hands efficient and impersonal. "I've got her, ma'am," he murmured, his voice low. "We need to clear the area." "Don't touch her," I snapped. The command tore out of my throat before I could check it, raw and possessive. It wasn't the cool, calculated order of a crime boss. It was the growl of an animal protecting its mate. Elias froze, his hand hovering inches from Sophia's arm, his eyes widening slightly as he registered the break in my composure. I looked up, sweeping my gaze across the circle of onlookers. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. I simply let the mask slip just enough to show them the monster they all whispered about but rarely saw. I locked eyes with the construction tycoon, then the mayor, then the Moretti lieutenant. I let the silence stretch, filling it with a cold, suffocating pressure, until the air in the ballroom felt too thin to breathe. One by one, they looked away. They shuffled back, suddenly finding their shoes or their drinks fascinating, the collective instinct of self-preservation kicking in. "Back," I said, the word barely a whisper, yet it carried across the silence with the weight of a gavel strike. Now, the circle widened, the phones were lowered, the sharks retreated, deciding that this particular meal wasn't worth the risk of being bitten back. I turned my attention back to Sophia. She was so pale, her skin translucent against the dark fabric of my suit. I shifted my grip, sliding one arm under her knees and the other supporting her back, lifting her effortlessly. She was lighter than she looked, lighter than the burden of the secrets she carried. As I pulled her up against me, her head lolled onto my shoulder, her nose brushing against my neck. The contact was electric, a violation of every rule I had set for us. For months, we had played this game at a distance, stolen glances, coded conversations, the agonizing friction of being in the same room, but worlds apart. Now, that distance was obliterated. I could smell the citrus and jasmine of her perfume, souring slightly with the metallic tang of fear. I could feel the feverish heat radiating from her body, soaking through my shirt, branding me. Holding her like this, in the center of my empire, I realized with a terrifying clarity that I had already lost the war I was fighting. I had told myself she was just a variable, a problem to be solved. But as her hair tickled my jaw and her unconscious weight settled against my heart, I knew I would burn this entire city to the ground before I let anyone touch her again. "Clear the exit," I told Elias, my voice steady again, the armor back in place. Bring the car around. The armored one. No stops. I didn't wait for his confirmation. I turned and walked through the path my reputation had cleared, carrying the woman who could destroy me, and the only thing I could think about was how perfectly, dangerously, she fit in my arms. The heavy door of the SUV slammed shut, sealing us inside a vault of silence and leather. The chaos of the gala, the flashing cameras, and the hungry whispers were instantly severed, replaced by the low, steady hum of a reinforced engine. I didn't take the seat across from her. I sat directly beside her, pulling her body against mine as the vehicle surged forward, merging aggressively into the city traffic. The partition between us and the driver rose with a soft mechanical whir, granting us the only privacy I had known in a decade. Here, in the semi-darkness of the cabin, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows looked like smeared neon blood. I ignored them. My world had narrowed down to the woman breathing shallowly in my arms. I shifted her weight, resting her head against my shoulder, and began the assessment that my position demanded. This wasn't just care. It was a forensic examination of a crime scene that happened to be the person I was falling for. I stripped off my gloves, needing the tactile precision of bare skin. I pressed 2 fingers against the pulse point of her neck. Her heart was fluttering like a trapped bird, erratic and dangerously fast, fighting against a system that was trying to shut down. I leaned in close, inhaling deeply near her lips, bypassing the expensive perfume to find the truth underneath. There it was. Beneath the notes of jasmine and fear, there was a faint, cloying sweetness, like overripe apricots left to rot in the sun. My stomach turned over, a cold knot of recognition tightening in my gut. It wasn't simple exhaustion. It wasn't a panic attack. I pushed up the sleeve of her emerald dress, my movements urgent but gentle. The skin of her inner arm was pale, fragile, but there, just above the elbow, was the evidence. A tiny red puncture mark, surrounded by a blossoming bruise that was already turning a sickly shade of gray. The widow's kiss, I whispered into the cool air of the car. It was a neurotoxin, synthetic and nasty, a favorite of the Moretti family when they wanted to send a message without making a scene. It wasn't meant to kill instantly. It was meant to incapacitate, to paralyze the victim while their mind remained terrified and awake, eventually shutting down the respiratory system if untreated. They hadn't targeted her because she was a journalist. They didn't care about her exposés. They had targeted her because they had seen me watching her. They had struck at her to bleed me. The realization shifted something fundamental inside me. The calculated, pragmatic boss who weighed risks and benefits evaporated. In her place sat a woman consumed by a possessive, white-hot rage. I looked down at Sophia, her features softened by the unconsciousness, her lashes casting long shadows on her cheeks. They had touched her. They had put their poison in her veins just to see if I would flinch. I brushed a stray lock of copper hair from her forehead, my hand lingering on her skin. The anger was a living thing, clawing at my throat, but beneath it was a terrifying protectiveness. I had spent months keeping my distance, convincing myself that my indifference was her shield. I had failed. And now that the pretense was gone, I felt the crushing weight of ownership settle over me. She wasn't just a variable in my city anymore. She was mine. And God help anyone who tried to take what I had claimed. Sophia stirred then, a low moan escaping her lips as the initial wave of the paralysis fought against her consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and hazy, swimming with the drug's influence. She looked up at me, blinking slowly, trying to piece together the fractured reality. Val, she slurred, her voice a broken whisper. She didn't have the strength to finish my name. In any other circumstance, she would have pulled away. She would have remembered who I was, the monster she was hunting, and recoiled from the intimacy of my hold. But the toxin had stripped away her defenses, leaving only the raw, instinctual truth. Instead of fighting, she leaned into my touch. Her head grew heavy against my chest again, her hands seeking mine in the darkness, her fingers curling weakly around my thumb. "I've got you," I murmured, my lips brushing the top of her head. "Just breathe." The car slowed, turning off the main road. We were leaving the grid, moving into the shadows where my true power lived. The safe house wasn't on any map, a ghost in the city's architecture. I tightened my arm around her waist, holding her closer than necessary, savoring the weight of her trust, even if it was chemically induced. The journalist was gone for tonight. There was only the woman, and the queen, who would tear the world apart to keep her breathing. The elevator doors slid open with a whisper, revealing the sanctuary I had built for a life I rarely got to live. The penthouse was a study in sterile luxury, floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the city that wanted us dead, polished concrete floors that held no footprints, and furniture that looked more like sculpture than comfort. It was a fortress of solitude, aggressively lonely and cold, designed for a woman who didn't expect to share her morning coffee with anyone. But tonight, the silence was broken by the frantic, labored breathing of the woman in my arms. I carried Sophia into the master bedroom, the only room in the apartment that held any warmth. I laid her down on the charcoal sheets, her emerald dress a splash of vibrant, chaotic color against the monochrome world I inhabited. She was burning up now, the toxin accelerating her metabolism as her body tried to fight an enemy it couldn't see. Her skin was slick with a cold sweat, her hair plastered to her forehead. The widow's kiss was moving into its second phase, the fever that preceded the shutdown. I moved with the efficiency of a field medic, but my hands felt strange, too large, too rough. I had to get her temperature down, and I had to check for any secondary injection sites. The dress had to go. It was a medical necessity, I told myself, a pragmatic decision made by a pragmatic woman. But as my fingers found the hidden zipper at the base of her spine, the air in the room thickened. The sound of the zipper sliding down was deafening in the quiet room. I peeled the silk away from her shoulders, the fabric heavy and wet with her perspiration. I was unveiling her, layer by layer, exposing the vulnerability she had armored with designer clothes and sharp wit. I pulled the dress down, working it over her hips, leaving her in the delicate lace of her lingerie. That was when I saw it. It was taped to the delicate skin just beneath her left breast, right over the frantic hammer of her heart. A small black rectangle of plastic, a wire. I stopped, my hand hovering over the device. The evidence of her betrayal was sitting right there, pressed against her naked skin. She had worn this to the gala. She had worn this while she smiled at me, while she flirted, while she collapsed into my arms. She had been recording everything. The ambient noise of the party, the sound of my heartbeat when I carried her, the whispered commands to my security team. She had brought a weapon into my arms, intent on capturing the monster on tape. I should have been furious. I should have felt the cold, sharp edge of betrayal slicing through the concern. But looking at the wire, looking at the fragile rise and fall of her ribs beneath it, I only felt a heavy, weary resignation. I knew who she was. I had always known. I reached out, my fingernail catching the edge of the medical tape. "This is going to hurt," I whispered to her unconscious form. I ripped the tape off in one quick motion. Sophia flinched in her sleep, a small whimper escaping her throat, but she didn't wake. I held the wire in my hand for a moment, staring at the blinking red light that indicated it was still active, still listening. I didn't destroy it. I didn't crush it under my heel. I simply set it on the nightstand next to the bowl of water and the antidote kit, a silent sentinel to the complicated war we were fighting. I turned back to the work of saving her. I dipped a soft cloth into the basin of cool water, wringing it out until it was damp. I ran the cloth over her neck, her shoulders, the valley between her breasts where the wire had been. The sensation of caring for her, the contrast of the cool water against her feverish skin, the slide of my calloused thumb against her softness, was more intimate than any night we could have spent together. I was mapping the geography of a woman who wanted to put me in a cage, and I was realizing that I would happily walk into that cage if she was the one holding the key. I traced the line of her jaw with the damp cloth. "You were so close," I murmured, the words for no one but us. "You almost had me." The antidote I had administered in the car was doing its work. The frantic racing of her heart was slowing, settling into a rhythm that was less terrified bird and more steady drumbeat. The pallor of her skin was giving way to a more natural flush. Sophia shifted on the bed. Her breathing hitched, then deepened. The tension in her brow smoothed out as the pain receded. Then her eyelids fluttered. The haze of the drug was lifting, clearing the fog. She blinked once, twice, trying to focus on the ceiling, on the shadows, on me. When her eyes finally found mine, the confusion cleared instantly, replaced by a sharp, terrified recognition. She looked at the ceiling, then at her own bare shoulders, and finally at the wire sitting on the nightstand. She tried to scramble back, her hand flying to her chest where the tape had been, covering her vulnerability with a shaking palm. The journalist was back. The game was on. But looking at her, shivering in my bed, I knew the rules had changed forever. Sophia scrambled backward against the headboard, her heels digging into the mattress as she pulled the charcoal sheet up to her chin. The movement was pure instinct, a desperate attempt to put distance between her nakedness and the woman she had spent 8 months trying to destroy. Her eyes darted around the room, cataloging the exits, the height of the windows, and the sheer impossibility of her situation. She was an investigative journalist who had woken up in the lion's den, stripped of her armor and her secrets. I didn't move to stop her. I stood by the bedside, perfectly still, letting her panic burn itself out against the wall of my composure. I reached out and picked up the small black wire from the nightstand. I held it up to the light, turning it slowly between my thumb and forefinger like a rare jewel. The red light blinked once, a steady, rhythmic accusation in the dim room. "Did you get what you needed?" I asked. My voice was low, devoid of the anger she was undoubtedly expecting. The audio quality on these is usually terrible, especially when buried under layers of silk. I hope you caught my good side. Sophia's mouth opened, then closed. She looked from the wire to my face, her chest heaving beneath the sheet. She swallowed hard, her throat dry. "I can explain." "Don't." I dropped the wire back onto the nightstand. It made a sharp click against the glass surface. "Don't insult my intelligence, Sophia. You're a journalist. I'm a criminal. You were doing your job." I took a step closer to the bed. "And you were terrible at it." She flinched as I moved, her knuckles turning white where she gripped the bedding. "Are you going to kill me?" The question hung in the air, stark and brutal. It was the only logical conclusion for her. In her world, in the stories she wrote, people like me didn't leave loose ends. We cut them. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I turned to the pitcher of water on the side table. I poured a glass, the sound of the liquid splashing against the crystal echoing loudly in the silence. I walked around to her side of the bed and held the glass out to her. "Drink," I commanded. She stared at the water, then at me. Her suspicion was so loud, it was almost audible. She thought it was poisoned. She thought this was the final act of the play. "If I wanted you dead," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming a velvet threat, "I would have left you on the ballroom floor. I wouldn't have carried you out. I wouldn't have brought you to the only place in this city where my enemies can't reach you. And I certainly wouldn't have ruined a $5,000 dress just to check your vitals." Her gaze wavered. The logic pierced through her fear. Slowly, with a trembling hand, she reached out and took the glass. Her fingers brushed mine, a fleeting, accidental contact that sent a jolt of electricity straight up my arm. She felt it too. I saw her breath hitch, her eyes widening slightly as she pulled the glass back and drank greedily. I sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress dipped under my weight, shifting her gravity toward me. She lowered the empty glass, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, watching me with the wariness of a trapped animal. "Why?" she whispered. "Why bring me here? You know what I have on you. You know what that wire recorded." "I know." I leaned in, invading her personal space, bracing my hand on the mattress beside her hip. I was close enough to count the freckles on her nose, close enough to see the gold flecks in her amber eyes. "But you're asking the wrong questions." I reached out, and she froze. I didn't strike her. I didn't grab her throat. I simply tucked a strand of damp copper hair behind her ear, my fingers lingering on the sensitive skin of her neck. I felt her pulse jump under my touch. Not just fear anymore, but something else. Something heavier. "You should be asking why you felt safe enough to faint in my arms," I murmured, tracing the line of her jaw with my thumb. "You should be asking why, when the darkness took you, the only name you called out was mine." Sophia's breath caught. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. The tension between us, the months of staring across crowded rooms, of reading between the lines of her articles, had distilled into this single, suffocating moment. She looked at my mouth, then back up to my eyes, her defiance crumbling into a raw, exposed need. "You're a monster," she breathed. But the words lacked conviction. They sounded more like a prayer than an accusation. "Yes," I agreed, leaning closer until our lips were inches apart, sharing the same air. "I am. But right now, I'm the only monster who is interested in keeping your heart beating." I let the silence stretch, heavy and sultry, filled with the things we were terrified to admit. I could have kissed her then. I could have taken what the tension was offering. But the vibration of my phone on the dresser shattered the moment, a jarring reminder that the world outside hadn't stopped just because we were holding our breath. I pulled back, the loss of proximity physical and cold. Sophia let out a shaky exhale, slumping slightly against the pillows as the spell broke. I stood up, retrieving the phone, the mask of the Mafia queen sliding back into place. "Rest," I said, turning toward the door, my voice efficient again. "The water wasn't poisoned, Sophia, but the champagne you drank at the gala was." "Poisoned?" The word left her lips like a fractured thing, brittle and terrified. She looked down at her hands, as if expecting to see the veins turning black beneath the skin. "But I was careful. I didn't take any food from the servers. I only took a glass from a passing tray because I needed to blend in." "That was enough," I said, my voice devoid of pity because pity wouldn't keep her alive. "The Morettis don't work in broad strokes, Sophia. They work in precise surgical strikes. They didn't need to poison the whole buffet. They just needed one waiter on their payroll to spot the redhead in the green dress and offer her the specific flute with the rim dusted in neurotoxin." Sophia shook her head, a flash of her old stubbornness cutting through the fear. "The Morettis, they're the ones moving the shipments through the harbor. I was getting close to proving their connection to the mayor. That's why they did this. It's the story. It's always the story." She was clinging to her professional identity like a shield, trying to frame this attempted murder as a badge of honor, proof that she was a good journalist, a threat to the establishment. She wanted to be a martyr for the truth, not a casualty of a war she didn't understand. I laughed then, a low, humorless sound that made her flinch. "You think you're that important to the Moretti family? You think they risk a public assassination at the charity gala of the year because you found a few doctored shipping manifests?" "I know what I found," she insisted, though her voice wavered. "I'm a threat to them." "You're a nuisance," I corrected ruthlessly. "If you were just a journalist, just a threat to their business, you would have disappeared 3 months ago. You would have walked into an alley and never walked out. They wouldn't have used a rare, expensive toxin meant to send a message. They would have used a bullet." I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights that seemed to burn a little brighter, a little more violently tonight. I needed her to understand the gravity of her position. I needed to strip away her illusions. "You're alive because I've allowed you to be," I said, turning back to face her. "Excuse me?" Her indignation flared, hot and bright. "That night at the docks, 4 months ago," I listed, ticking the moments off on my fingers. "You thought the security guard fell asleep, allowing you to slip past the gate. He didn't sleep. My sniper put a tranquilizer dart in his neck 2 seconds before you turned the corner." Sophia went still. "The coffee shop on 5th, I continued, stepping closer to the bed. "The car that swerved and nearly mounted the curb where you were sitting. That wasn't a drunk driver. That was a hitman whose brake lines had been cut by my mechanic an hour earlier. And the anonymous source who mailed you the file on the construction contracts? That was me, Sophia. I fed you the little fish to keep you away from the sharks. You..." She stared at me, her eyes wide, processing the rewriting of her history. "You've been stalking me?" "I've been curating your survival," I corrected. "I have spent a fortune in bribes, surveillance, and manpower to keep you breathing while you ran around this city trying to expose me. I cleaned up your messes. I covered your tracks. I stood between you and the abyss every single day." "Why?" The word was barely a whisper, heavy with confusion. "I'm trying to put you in prison." "Because I couldn't look away," I admitted, the truth tasting like ash and iron. "And the Morettis saw that. They didn't target you because of your article, Sophia. They targeted you because they saw me watching you. They saw the way I hesitated when your name came up. They realized before I did that you were the only leverage they have against me.
I sat on the edge of the bed again, trapping her gaze. The air between us was heavy, charged with the terrifying intimacy of the revelation.
They didn't poison a reporter, I said softly, reaching out to brush my thumb over the pulse point at her wrist, feeling the frantic rhythm of her life against my skin. They poisoned my weakness. They touched you to hurt me. And in doing so, they made the last mistake they will ever make. Sophia looked at me, and for the first time, she didn't see the crime boss or the story. She saw the terrifying depth of the obsession that had saved her life. She realized she wasn't just an observer in this game anymore. She was the queen on the chessboard, and I was the hand moving the pieces, willing to sacrifice every pawn, every knight, every castle, just to keep her from falling.
I am the weakness, she repeated,
the reality settling over her like a shroud. Yes, I confirmed. And that makes you the most dangerous thing in this room. The silence that followed was heavy, a physical weight pressing down on the bed between us. It wasn't the silence of a library or a church. It was the charged, static-filled quiet of a storm front just before the lightning strikes. The air in the penthouse felt suddenly too thick to breathe, saturated with the scent of her fear and the underlying, undeniable pull of the desire we had both spent months pretending didn't exist. Sophia looked at me, her lips parted slightly, searching my face for a lie she could cling to. She wanted me to be the villain again. She wanted me to be the cold, distant figure she could hate from a safe distance. But we were past that. We were sitting on the wreckage of our professional boundaries, two women trapped in a high-rise fortress while the wolves circled below.
I can't stay here, she whispered,
though she made no move to leave. I have a life. I have a deadline. I have an editor waiting for a call.
You have none of those things, I corrected,
my voice dropping to a murmur that vibrated in the small space between us. Not anymore. The moment you drank that champagne, Sophia the journalist ceased to exist. You are a target now. You are collateral damage in a war you aren't equipped to fight. I reached out again, my hand finding her arm, my fingers circling the bruise left by the injection. The skin was hot to the touch, feverish, a stark contrast to the cool, conditioned air of the room. I didn't pull away. Instead, I let my thumb trace the dark purple bloom of the bruise, a possessive, territorial gesture disguised as medical concern.
Does it hurt? I asked, watching her eyes.
Yes, she breathed, her gaze dropping to my hand on her arm. But not like I thought it would. Good. I slid my hand up, past the bruise, over the curve of her shoulder, letting my palm rest against the pulse point of her neck. Her heart was still racing, a frantic, staccato rhythm against my skin. Because I need you to feel this. I need you to understand what is happening here. I leaned in closer until I could feel the warmth of her breath on my cheek. The distance between us evaporated. This wasn't about interrogation anymore. It wasn't about power dynamics or leverage. It was about the raw, terrifying fact that I had almost lost her, and the realization that I would tear the world apart to ensure it never happened again.
You aren't a reporter investigating a story, I told her,
my eyes locking onto hers, demanding her submission to this new truth. And I am not just a subject in your file. We are past that. We are simply two women caught in the crossfire, and I am the only one with a gun. Sophia's resistance crumbled. I watched it happen in real time. The tension in her shoulders gave way, the defiant set of her jaw softening. She stopped fighting the narrative of good versus evil. She stopped trying to categorize me as the enemy. She leaned into my touch, her head tilting back slightly, exposing her throat. A gesture of trust so profound and dangerous, it made my own heart stutter. What are we then? She asked, the words barely audible. If I'm not the hunter, and you're not the prey, what are we?
We are inevitable, I answered.
My hand moved to her cheek, cupping her face, holding her there as the atmosphere shifted from tense to heavy, sultry, suffocating. The chemistry that had simmered between us for months, across ballroom floors, through camera lenses, in the subtext of stolen glances, finally boiled over. It wasn't safe, it wasn't smart, but looking at her, flushed and alive in my bed, I didn't care about smart. I am done protecting my reputation, I whispered, brushing my thumb over her lower lip, testing the softness, feeling the tremble that ran through her. I am done worrying about optics or leverage or the delicate balance of power in this city. I don't care if the Morettis burn down the harbor. I don't care if the mayor goes to prison. I am only interested in one thing.
What? She breathed, her eyes searching mine, wide and dark. Protecting the breath in your lungs, I vowed, the promise heavy with the weight of a blood oath. I will not lose you. Not to them, not to anyone else. You are mine to keep safe, Sophia, and I am a very jealous owner. For a moment, time suspended. We were on the precipice of something that couldn't be undone. Her hand came up, resting tentatively on my waist, clutching the fabric of my shirt. She was pulling me closer, not pushing me away. Then, the shrill ring of the secure line on the desk shattered the world. The shrill ring of the secure line shattered the atmosphere. It was a violent intrusion, a jagged reminder that the world outside hadn't paused for our revelation. I didn't want to answer it. I wanted to stay in the heavy, sultry bubble where only the pulse in her neck mattered. But survival is a habit I couldn't break, even for love. I reached over her, picking up the receiver. Elias's voice was a flat line of professional panic. They're in the lobby. Moretti bought the concierge. We have 3 minutes before they breach the elevator lockout. You need to move, boss. Now. 3 minutes. That was the price of my empire. Years of building fear, respect, and influence, all dissolving in 180 seconds, because a rival family finally smelled blood in the water. I hung up the phone. The seductive haze in the room evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, metallic clarity of a general surveying a losing battlefield. I looked down at Sophia. She was watching me, the fear creeping back into her amber eyes, displacing the desire. She knew. She didn't need to hear the call to know that the monsters were finally at the door. We have to leave, I said. It wasn't a question. It was a command. I moved away from the bed, crossing the room to the large abstract painting on the far wall, a chaotic swirl of grays and blacks I had bought because it reminded me of my own soul. I pushed the hidden release mechanism in the frame. The canvas swung forward silently, revealing not a weapon rack, but a simple, nondescript duffel bag and a steel safe. I spun the dial. Click, click, turn. The door swung open. Inside were stacks of currency in 3 different denominations, a pouch of uncut diamonds, and 2 passports. I had created them 5 years ago, one for me, under a name that had no blood on it, and one was blank. I had always told myself it was for a lieutenant, a sister, a variable I hadn't met yet. Looking back at Sophia, shivering in the center of my bed, I realized I had been waiting for her before I even knew her name. I tossed the passports into the bag. I grabbed the cash. I grabbed the encrypted hard drive that contained the insurance policy, the digital keys to every skeleton in the city's closet. "You're running?" Sophia asked, her voice trembling as she pulled the charcoal sheet tighter around herself. "What about your territory? The docks? The politicians? You spent a decade building this." I stopped, the bag heavy in my hand. I looked around the penthouse. The sterile glass, the expensive art, the cold, lonely view of the city that wanted to kill us. It didn't look like a kingdom anymore. It looked like a prison cell with a better view. "It's not a kingdom, Sophia," I said, walking back to the bed. "It's a cage. A golden, bulletproof cage where I wait for someone to finally take a shot that doesn't miss. Power isn't freedom. It's just the obligation to be the most dangerous person in the room, every single second of every single day." I reached out, grabbing the clothes I had set aside for an emergency, a pair of dark trousers, a thick wool sweater, heavy boots. Practical clothes. The clothes of a woman who intends to survive, not rule. "Get dressed," I ordered, tossing them onto the bed. "The woman who fainted in the ballroom stays here. The woman who survives comes with me." She didn't argue. The urgency in my voice, the reality of the timer ticking down in my head, spurred her into motion. She moved stiffly, her limbs still heavy from the toxin, but the adrenaline was helping. I helped her, my hands efficient now, devoid of the earlier seduction but filled with a fierce, possessive utility. I pulled the sweater over her head, smoothing it down. I knelt to lace her boots, tying the knots tight, ensuring she was ready to run. "We are walking away from everything," she whispered,
looking down at me as I tied the laces. If we leave, you can't come back. The Morettis will take it all. I stood up, gripping her shoulders. The heat of her body was the only warmth in the room. Let them have the ashes, I said, my voice fierce. Let them have the concrete and the bribes and the constant looking over their shoulders. I don't want the crown anymore, Sophia. I just want the woman who was brave enough to try and steal it. I grabbed her hand. It was cold, but her grip was strong. Do you trust me? She looked at the door, then at me. I don't have a choice. You always have a choice, I corrected. Stay and explain to the Morettis why you're in my bed, or run with me and burn the world down on our way out. She squeezed my hand. Run. I pulled her toward the service elevator hidden behind the pantry. The main lift was a trap. The indicator lights were already climbing, counting down the seconds until the Morettis kicked in the front door. The stairs were a kill box. But the service shaft, that was a ghost road I had paved with bribes and paranoia years ago. I punched the code into the keypad. The panel slid open. I looked at Sophia one last time in the light of the penthouse. Ready? Ready, she lied. I pushed the button. The doors closed, sealing us in darkness just as the first explosion shook the front door. The service elevator didn't announce our arrival with a polite chime. It simply shuddered to a halt, the doors rattling open to reveal the damp, concrete arteries that ran beneath the city's skin. The air here was heavy with the scent of stale water, oil, and the subterranean decay that the world above pretended didn't exist. It was a violent contrast to the sterile, climate-controlled perfection of the penthouse we had just abandoned. But to me, it smelled like oxygen. It smelled like a future. I didn't let go of Sophia's hand. Her grip was tight, her palms sweating against mine, but she kept pace. We moved through the shadows of the maintenance tunnels, running past the humming generators and the tangled veins of pipes that kept the tower alive. We were ghosts in the machine, slipping through the cracks while the Morettis were busy breaking down the front door of an empty castle. We burst out into the alleyway 3 blocks east, the night air hitting us like a physical blow. My backup vehicle was waiting exactly where I had parked it 6 months ago, a dented, nondescript sedan that was invisible in a city obsessed with limousines and sports cars. It was a humble vessel for an abdication, but it had a full tank of gas and an engine that wouldn't quit. I threw the bag into the back and shoved Sophia into the passenger seat. Keep your head down, I ordered, sliding behind the wheel. The engine roared to life, a rough, throaty sound that felt reassuringly mechanical. I didn't turn on the headlights until we were 2 streets away, merging seamlessly into the flow of traffic that didn't know the Queen was fleeing the board. The drive was a blur of neon lights and adrenaline. I kept my eyes on the mirrors, watching for the telltale pursuit, for the black SUVs that would signal our end. But the road behind us remained clear. The Morettis were likely still tearing apart the penthouse, overturning the expensive furniture, realizing too late that the prize had slipped through their fingers. As we crossed the bridge, putting the river between us and the skyline, I risked a single glance back. The city was a sprawling grid of diamonds and darkness, beautiful and cruel. Somewhere in that glittering expanse was the life I had spent a decade building, the power, the fear, the reputation that had opened every door. It was all gone now, left behind like a shed skin. The realization should have been terrifying. It should have felt like a phantom limb, an aching loss of identity. But as the city faded into the rearview mirror, shrinking until it was just a smudge of light against the horizon, I didn't feel loss. I felt the crushing weight on my chest finally lift. The silence in the car shifted. The sharp, metallic tang of fear began to dissipate, replaced by a heavy, quiet intimacy. We weren't running for our lives anymore. We were running toward them. Sophia shifted in her seat. She wasn't looking at the city. She was looking at me. In the dim glow of the dashboard lights, her face was pale but determined. The journalist who hunted stories was gone. The woman who had survived the hunt remained. Slowly, deliberately, she reached across the center console. Her hand found mine on the gear shift, her fingers lacing through mine with a strength that surprised me. It wasn't a desperate cling for safety. It was a choice. She was confirming what we both knew. She wasn't a hostage in this escape. She was a partner. Where are we going? She asked softly, her thumb brushing over my knuckles. North, I said, squeezing her hand.
to an airfield that doesn't ask questions. We drove into the darkness, the engine humming a steady rhythm of freedom. The private airfield was waiting, the jet engines already spooling up, singing a song of departure. We left the car, the last tether to the ground, and walked across the tarmac. The wind whipped at our clothes, but neither of us shivered. We boarded the plane, the door sealing shut behind us, with a finality that felt like a promise kept. The jet banked sharply, climbing through the cloud layer until the city and the Mafia war were nothing but distant, insignificant sparks far below. I looked over at Sophia. She had stripped away the last of her cover story, resting her head against my shoulder, her breathing finally evening out into sleep. I had lost a kingdom tonight, but looking at the woman safe in my arms, I knew I had won the only thing that mattered. If you've ever walked away from everything for the one person who mattered, subscribe and tell me your story.